Greetings, ding dongs. It is Allison Dixon here, back with another movie night with the Siskel to my Ebert, Josh from Press Play and Scream. Hello, hello, hello. I'm bringing you right
Thanks.
in. We're not
Thanks so
wasting a lot of
much.
time here.
Thanks so much for bringing me back. As I've said, I'll come on this show anytime and I'll for any movie. It's always a pleasure. But on the other hand, if I'm Siskel and you're Ebert, we're both dead.
Dead. Actually, that little morbid undertone fits the movie we're talking about in this episode. I thought that this would be perfect for us because we both are into horror. We're both into sick humor. We really love food.
Oh yeah.
So, of course, I was like, we need to talk about The Menu, which came out last year around, well, it was released in the United States wide in November of last year, premiered at the Toronto Film Festival in September of last year, and it stars Anya Taylor Joy, Nicholas Hoult, and Ralph Fiennes, John Leguizamo. There's a nice ensemble here.
Definitely. Yeah.
And it is absolutely a wicked movie. And I can't wait to break this down. In fact, I think whenever I start this episode, if the sound makes it in, great. But I kind of want to put that bell that signals the start of a new course in the menu, the bong
Yeah.
sound,
Absolutely.
and maybe a clap
Absolutely.
somehow. I don't know how we're going to do it.
I don't think we should get the clap. I think that's a terrible. That's a, that no, that.
No, we're not going to get. Oh my God.
The word that comes to mind for me with this movie is diabolical.
Mm,
I mean, it is absolutely that. And I love
yes.
the very, just from the first, just seconds of the movie, it's not the usual credits even. It's Searchlight Pictures invites you to experience.
Hmm.
I mean, right off that sets the tone perfectly for the whole rest of the thing.
It's described as a horror comedy, and I'd say that's very accurate. And it lampoons or skewers, rather, the realm of ultra fine dining, not just fine dining. We're talking the next few tiers of fine dining. Anybody who's ever seen the Netflix show Chef's Table,
Which I love. Absolutely.
and the creator of that show is a second unit director of this movie. It's produced by the team, Adam McKay and Will Ferrell. They made a bunch of comedies or kind of those slick contemporary biting satires, like The Big Short is, I think, the first one that comes to mind. The very like almost too cool for its own good, but just pulls back enough to make it like memorable at the very least. But this one, and the director, oh, by the way, the director of this, I'm sorry, I'm like finding my stuff here. Mark
Mark Mylod.
Mylod.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He mostly seems to have only directed episodes of like Succession and other TV shows. I think this is his
Yeah.
first film.
Shameless. He did a lot of Shameless. He did a
Yeah,
lot of Game of Thrones. But yeah, a TV director. I mean, I hate that. In this era, of course, that's not what it used to be. It's still a
right.
fantastic set of skills to bring. But the fact that, like, basically, yeah, first shot out of the gate, he's bringing us this. And then not just him, because it's also the pair of writers, Seth Rice,
Mhm.
who was a TV comedy writer before this. He did Comedy Bang, he did The Onion, he did Seth Meyers, and his partner in crime, Will Tracy, who wrote for Succession and also wrote
Yes.
for The Onion. And so these three like come out of nowhere with an uppercut to the jaw with this movie. I mean, it's
Oh, yeah.
fascinating what they accomplished.
And really, we talk a lot, at least out in the wider space, about how satire feels like it's dead in this day and age because things have become so grossly absurd in real life. The shit that comes at us every day that you can't tell what's a joke anymore because it's all gotten so over the top. But then you take two veteran writers from The Onion, and if anybody can write a satire, it's people who wrote for The Onion, and then add on the rest of this team that, oh, and Succession, I should mention. Have you seen Succession, by the
Uh,
way?
I've seen the first season, and I feel like there's definitely some of that DNA in this in terms of you can because of who this movie is largely poking fun at,
Oh,
which is
absolutely.
entitled awful people and
Yes.
getting their comeuppance for the most part. And I mean, there's
Yeah.
that correlation, but even so, just the presentation of this
Mm?
is astonishing. It's astonishing how they build it. You couldn't really quite call it a mystery because it's not a whodunit per se,
No.
right? We know who's doing it, and it's the question of finding out why and how. but there's still that kind of Agatha Christie locked room mystery element to it
Mhm.
that just it serves the whole thing up beautifully. It absolutely does.
I'm so glad you said Agatha Christie. That's been
Yeah,
the forefront of my mind. Also, another movie that came out last year that kinda sets this with a similar kinda setup anyway is Glass Onion,
absolutely.
Rian Johnson flick. Literally starts you out with a bunch of rich people waiting around to take a boat to an island
Mhm.
where some mysterious person lives and adventures will unfold.
A
Um
mysterious genius, no less.
Oh, absolutely. And what I absolutely love is we have a young couple that we begin with, Anya Taylor Joy and Nicholas Hoult, are presented to us as a young couple, boyfriend girlfriend kind of situation. And he,
Well, that's our assumption, isn't it? That's
yes.
the assumption that we're making. There's a lot of this that relies so much on what we're bringing to the table in our own
Mm,
mind based on what we're being shown. And yeah, you've got these I was even remarking on this to you last night, these this young, pale, big-eyed, otherworldly looking stars. They're like a couple of weird, gorgeous praying mantises, basically. So it's kind of funny to see the two of them, and they play off each other wonderfully well in terms of getting on each other's nerves on screen. And again, you couldn't quite call the entire framework of this a mystery, but there is mystery to it. For example, the mystery of who is she kind of and what's she doing here? And we're given a
yes.
clue right the first time we see her. And my mother always said, look at the shoes. The shoes tell the story. We have a woman wearing very elegant looking
Silk
evening.
dress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, of course, that's Anya Taylor Joy. She wears it
Yeah.
wonderfully. And Doc Martens.
Oh,
That's our
yes.
first clue. We should be looking at that and saying, she's off. She
Mhm.
doesn't belong with the rest of these people. She's not one of them.
Right. Oh, and she
So,
has
I
a
mean,
leather
and
jacket too. That's
yeah,
on
there
that.
is that
Yeah.
too.
Oh, and there's just something about her that you described her so well because she is kind of an otherworldly looking person. She has such strong features. I just
Yeah.
absolutely love her look in general. And what's interesting is Emma Stone was originally supposed to play this character, and she's like a softer version, I would say. Her features are softer, whereas Anya's face almost looks like it could just cut you. She has that supermodel look going on. And Nicholas Hoult, who I often find so interesting because probably one of my favorite films that he's in of all time is when he was a child about a boy with Hugh Grant. Can't
Wait a
remember.
minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a
Yeah.
minute. Wait a minute. Are you telling me he was the kid? He was the
Yes.
kid in that
He
movie?
was the kid in that movie. Yeah.
I had
Yeah,
no
look at
idea.
him, and he's all grown up and to a big douchebag in this movie.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, but
But
before that, though, also, I just wanted to say the other thing about because first of all, yeah, Emma Stone, I could see it,
yeah.
but she's almost like too relatable from the start, it
Yes.
seems to
Mhm.
me. Like she's somebody you could definitely picture just hanging out and getting stoned with, for example. But like Anya Taylor Joy, no, there's more mystery
Yeah.
to her. And but also, like you were talking about her features, and in a movie full of extraordinarily funny lines, oddly, one of the ones that really actually makes me howl is at the end when she takes two bites from the burger and says, "It appears my eyes were bigger than my stomach." And her eyes are the size of goddamn dinner plates. I mean,
So
that's some
great.
funny shit. But yeah, Holt's character, and like I said, I've seen every episode of Chef's Table. I love shows like that. I'm a
Yeah,
huge foodie
same.
and I adore dining experiences. And even I think he is a fucking obnoxious punk from the word go.
I feel weirdly so much like I hate him, but I can
Yeah.
sort of relate because of the same like we're both kind of food nerds. Like I know what a Paco jet is because yeah, like that's the kind of shit and he knows what one is, but nobody else knows what is unless you work in that industry. But if you follow a
Yeah.
lot of stuff, a Paco jet, by the way, is a machine that makes frozen stuff into snow and other things, but it's like $7,000, usually owned by very rich people or restaurants. And Nicholas Holt's character, Tyler, says that he has one. So that tells you something. That's
So
what
he
pushes it over the edge. Like, we know what a Paco jet is, but you think we fucking own a Paco jet? No, we're poor. We're buying the Ninja version for $200. That is what we have. But if you know a guy who has a Paco jet and he's not a chef, You're just in for a ride, man. You're just in for a ride with a guy that's gonna drive you fucking crazy.
Definitely.
And I what really bothered me too, though it came before that when they were getting on the boat to go to the island, is she was, smoking a cigarette, and he was like, "It's gonna ruin your palate. You're not gonna be able to taste anything." And it's like,
Mhm.
"Shut up. Just shut the fuck up and let me."
The way these two are presented at again at the start, the very start of this movie, I mean, you're immediately kind of dividing the audience
Mhm.
into two camps on her side and on his side. And it's weird because, yeah, generally I would be the one geeking out over the chef and the
Yeah.
preparation and this and that. But I immediately dislike this man.
Yeah.
And she's being a bitchy killjoy. But on the other hand, I can sympathize because she's trapped in this experience, which she clearly is not going to get anything out of. We know that at
Right.
the beginning, and there are plenty of people that's just not for them, and that's fine. But
Yeah.
but you are one of those people, and you're dealing with someone who simply won't let you be one of those people. You have to understand and appreciate this whole thing because that's what they're into.
Right.
It's a living personal fucking hell, and at least she's, and despite the kind of ethereal beauty that she has, she's funny. She's
Yeah.
real,
She is.
which is interesting
Oh,
given what we find out later that her career is. But the characterization is deft. It's
yes.
these wonderful little brushstrokes that give us the big story immediately, and the precision with which these things are accomplished by the writers and the director. I marveled at it.
Oh,
Marveled.
yeah. It was so great to see Judith Light, who,
Always.
wow, I was not expecting her. And of course, John Leguizamo, have to bring him up. He plays this washed up movie star that hasn't made a good movie in a very long time. And he's trying to name drop and just get into places where he feels special and exclusive. So he brought his personal assistant along because he doesn't have any friends.
Yeah.
Judith Light and her husband, those 2 are the older couple who are rich and bored and just wanna be there because they can be there. They don't really care about the food per se, they just
Yeah.
wanna be in the exclusive place.
Just a status thing that's become routine for them. And then we're going to have a whole thing about this later, but as it's mentioned, most people would be honored beyond belief to get to have that experience once, and they just
Oh, yeah. I've
play it
never
perfect.
had have you ever had a meal that's like, have you ever had a chef's table type meal
Oh,
before?
yes. I remember all of the best meals that I've ever had.
Yeah.
And because, as you say, yeah, that's a huge thing for me. And
Yeah.
I've had wonderful dining experiences. The one that has always stood out beyond the rest was the my wedding brunch. Actually, it was at a restaurant in Chicago called 16,
Oh, okay.
which regrettably is in the Chicago Trump Tower, but
Yeah.
I think they're trying to fix that now. But everything that was brought, it wasn't just delicious, and it wasn't just that it was wonderfully plated. It was that it was ingenious in some way. Like the
Mhm.
first course was a pot of what can best be described as edible dirt.
Yeah.
It like soil, but it was made painstakingly from different kinds of crumbs, but you'd swear that you're eating dirt, and
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
like a supposed radish growing from the dirt, but
Oh.
it was infused with this creamy butter, and that was just the first course, and it went on, but, like, everything surprised and amused me, and I there's so few dining experiences like that, and this movie, I mean, absolutely gives us that. What about you? Memorable experiences there?
I've had a few. I mean, I haven't had anything quite to the level of this, like, or where it's the molecular gastronomy kind
Yes.
of experience. I haven't really gotten to do that myself yet. I've been to a lot of great French restaurants and classic restaurants, been a lot of celebrity chef kind of restaurants. I've been to a lot of really very high end like steak places, sushi places,
Oh, yeah.
but I have not had that experience yet. I would love to. I do know that I would probably need to have a snack before I go because to fill yourself is not, it's even mentioned in this movie when we're introduced to the chef, played stunningly by Ralph Fiennes. This might be probably my new favorite role of his. I could have some recency bias going on here, but there's something about this character of his, and we'll dig deeper in a minute,
Absolutely.
where he says, "You're not here to eat. You're here." What did he say?
To
He's like,
taste,
"To
to
taste."
savor, to
Yeah.
experience. That
Mhm.
was That monologue, which accompanied the first course, the supposed island, as he called it, which
Yes.
was an ecosystem on a plate. I
Right.
mean, that's one of the most moving pieces of writing I've ever heard about
Yeah.
what it means to experience food on something approaching this level. And as we're
Mhm.
shown ultimately, by the way, it's in many ways, for all of the wonder and the magic that goes into this sort of thing, at the end of the day, it's not always about that in terms of what makes a meal great. Yeah,
Yes.
Ratatouille
Yes.
sort of follows the same thing, but
Oh, for
I did
sure.
want to go back to Leguizamo for a second
Oh, yes, let's do.
because, first of all, you said, and you're right, that in this he plays a washed-up movie star. Do you know the name of his character in this?
God, I actually don't
That's because
remember.
the name of his character in this is movie star. He
Oh,
was not given a name in this movie.
okay. Okay.
That's his
I
whole character is movie star. Like, which,
that makes
because I looked, I went to IMDb specifically for this
mhm,
purpose because I've been a lifelong fan of John Leguizamo, and
mhm.
I think he gives his all in everything he does, and he's a massive talent. That's absolutely true in this. He gives a terrific performance. He's funny and kind of sleazy. But what bothers me, and that definitely goes for this role, is that it used to be earlier in his career, he was so memorable in even tiny roles like Benny Blanco from the Bronx in Carlito's Way. If you remember
Yes.
anything about that film, you remember him, and he was in two scenes.
Mhm.
Or Manny in The Fan. He was The Pest, Summer of Sam, Spun. All of these things let him shine because it seemed like they were kind of tailor made for him. Like you
Yes.
couldn't picture anyone else playing those specific roles. He lit up the screen. He did those one man shows. He had so much range.
And I loved him in Romeo and Juliet, the
Absolutely.
with
A great
Leonardo DiCaprio.
performance.
Mhm.
Like, you can't picture someone else being that balls to the wall, just
Yes.
filling that role. And but for the past 20 years, it has seemed like no one knows what to do with this guy.
I agree with
Yeah,
you. I really do. I think that's something he maybe brought to his own portrayal of it. I'm sure as an actor, playing an actor who's at the end of his career is kind of on the decline, it's gotta be in your head. It has
sure.
to be.
Oh, sure.
And I think an actor as smart as him, for sure. Now, we gotta mention another pair that is in this group because again, they are the ones that I would probably on an intellectual level want to sit at the table with, to discuss
Yes.
shit with, but
Yes.
that I would loathe them at the same time, the food critics, the food
Absolutely.
writers. We had a pair, of food writers, and I believe is it Amy Carrera? It's Felicity and Richard. I'm trying to remember. I got my casting list here, but I'm just not reading from it like I'm supposed to.
You're
Uh,
still more prepared than I am.
well, hey, we're working on it, we're working on it.
He's
But yeah, they're a pair that work for a magazine critic.
really her assistant, and but
Eh,
also he's her enabler. I mean, she's the most excessively vain person,
mhm,
perhaps in even the entire film, I would say, and that's really saying something.
absolutely.
And he is just like he's got his head so far up her ass that
Yes.
when she smiles, you can see him waving past the uvula. And beautifully written. Again, just the dialogue that comes out of their mouths. She is so believably dryly awful in terms of
Well,
like how self-centered she is.
she just strikes me as someone because while you and I both love fine dining experiences and food technique, and we love studying all this stuff. And we could definitely say a chunk of our brain relates directly to Nicholas Hoult and that enthusiasm that he has for all this stuff. We probably don't get quite as like emotional about it as he does. But with her, on the other hand, she reminds me of someone who would probably never in a million years eat a cheeseburger. And of course, we're going to talk about a cheeseburger later, like a greasy, American diner, like
Yeah.
or like a fucking bag of Doritos or
No.
just
Yeah.
or something from Taco Bell. I mean, for God's sake, like real food, like everyday person food, because she's too busy trying to shut down restaurants because of some weird little tweak of an ingredient that wasn't just right. Or she'll like if you ever pull up the New York Times culture section and they're reviewing a new restaurant in town, everybody probably can remember the viral review that the New York Times did for the Guy Fieri restaurant in Times Square. And it is, I'll have to post a link to that in the show notes. It is, by God, the first time I ever read it, I was laughing quietly to myself and just kind of nodding along, going like,
Mm.
"Yeah, I'm so tired of this crappy stuff." But then, like, over the years, I've just softened a lot on that kind of thing. And then I read it recently again. It was just mean. Like, it was just so mean because it just felt very classist. It felt very much like it was insulting everybody who went there. So she's just the food critic is somebody that I just couldn't quite relate to her. But I wanna sit at the table and talk and listen to them talk because they're talking about things that I'm into. I wanna hear what they're saying about this. And when she notices in this little as we get into the food, by the way,
Mhm.
there's a the course that comes this is it the 2nd course? The bread course?
That would be the second course,
That would
yes.
be the 2nd course. So I know I'm jumping ahead, but I'm only gonna pick a little part out of it and just say there was, like, a bread course without bread. It was just the accompaniments of bread, and this is the moment in the dining experience where we're starting to be like, "Huh, that's odd. This is a little high concept." But they're all kinda laughing about it. Not all of them, but a few of them are just going, "Ha, ha, ha, I see what he's doing here. He's playing a game." And so he brings out, yeah, empty plates with little dots of condiments, like there's a pesto, there's, like, some kind of a olive oil emulsion kinda thing. There's,
Yeah.
like, 6 or 7 different things, little tiny dots, and you're just supposed to, like, lick them. And Anya Taylor Joy's character, she's like they're insulting you. Like,
Yeah.
she's completely outside of this whole experience, right?
Well, she is the kid from The Emperor's New Clothes. I mean,
Right.
she is not impressed by any of this to be,
Not at all.
and
Not at
whereas
all.
everyone else there is, and so to varying degrees, and so she has no problem saying, "This is ludicrous and you're being insulted, and what on
But
earth is wrong with you?"
I only brought it up because the with the food critics is because there's this tiny dot of an emulsion on her plate and she's picking at it. Like, you'd have to practically look at this thing with a magnifying glass to even see it properly. And what does she say? She's like, "I think this emulsion is broken.
Yes.
This is unacceptable in a place of this caliber." And it's like, how can you even see it?
So many great characters in this movie, but
Mhm.
she's definitely one of my favorites because, first of all, she is absolutely the portrait of pretension and pseudo intellectual privilege run disastrously amok. She is
Oh,
so
absolutely.
horribly in love with herself.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, you're right. First of all, a person like that, to a certain degree, has crossed a threshold where they pity them, that they
Yes.
are incapable of still experiencing smaller and simpler joys when it comes to food, that now it has to be this big production to stimulate them even slightly. And to have lost that connection with what food actually means in favor of some higher idea of enlightenment about what it is supposed to mean or what sounds smart if she says that's what it means.
Yeah.
But you said that she's not relatable. And I'll tell you this, as somebody who's worked as a critic in numerous mediums, you get to the point where, again, when you love yourself that much in general and your own capacity for meanness in particular,
Mhm.
because other people love it. And it's
Yeah.
so easy to things that are wrong and, as you say, pick them apart and lambaste them. And it's more fun. It gets to that reptilian brain that gives you
Yes.
that nice, nasty rush until eventually, as a critic, that's all you really want to do. You don't want to like anything, really, if
Right.
you're a certain kind of critic. You just want to piss on it all just because it makes you feel big.
Right.
So, I mean, I get it, but it also just makes me hate her even more, obviously. And it's cool, by the way, that, and this goes to the directing again, that toward the beginning of this dining experience, there's a lot of kind of tracking different shots through the dining area
Yes.
and overlapping bits of the conversations. It's a very Robert Altman thing.
Ver oh,
Things become very un-Robert Altman.
excellent call out. Excellent call out.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, just the fact that this director was able to give us this, because the beginning is very much like an episode of Chef's Table when they are
Yes.
taken to the island and they're shown around, see that everything is sustainable and everything is farm to table and the whole thing is its own ecosystem and everything is precise and just so. And they see the living quarters where all of the kitchen staff are living in the same
Oh, and
room,
look out at this boat. They're harvesting the scallops you're going to eat tonight.
harvesting, and they look over there. That's the master's cottage, but no one's allowed in the master's. And we're thinking to ourselves to a certain degree, like, yeah, I mean, this is eccentric, but we've seen weirder.
The living quarters, though, I will say this. I would say the first time I saw them walk into there and it's just a wide open thing with beds lined up very close together and like no privacy at all. The toilet's even open. Everything is all live in. It immediately reminded me of like a cult or a prison.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The same standards that we would kind of shrug off
Mhm.
as they would apply to a genius chef because we've been told to believe that genius chefs have their own way of doing things. It's very precise. And by the end, oh, wait a minute. No, it's actually, it's a cult. It's a
Yeah.
cult. It's
Yes.
the same behavior. It's the same thing applied to a different direction. I knew that you would pick that up because you did the whole series on cults recently. But a lot of people include the people who are a little bit like Tyler, and the
Mhm.
audience are thinking, yes, indeed. I believe I would like to go on a tour such as this.
Oh, we also have a group of 3 kinda tech bros
Yeah.
that work with the an angel investor of this restaurant, of Hawthorne. That is the name of the restaurant, by the way, and Ralph Fiennes was the owner, and then I guess it kinda, like, switched hands, that's alluded to later on, to this angel investor guy. It's also the first movie I can recall that mentions COVID as part
Yes.
of the maybe other than Glass Onion. I think COVID also was mentioned in Glass Onion, but there are very few movies that are doing that even now, like, many years into this, pandemic. But yeah, so we are presented with all these people and we bring them, yes, to the island and the sort of maitre d', Elsa,
Yeah.
she is this very severe woman in black and white, and she's played by an actress named Hong Chow, I think her name
Correct.
yeah, wasn't sure if
Correct.
we're pronouncing her last name correctly, and she immediately when she sees Nicholas Hoult and Anya Taylor Joy, she looks at her and says who she thinks she is. Turns out that the reservation was for another girl that
Uh-huh.
Nicholas was gonna bring along, but that didn't work out, so this was the girl he brought along. That's our first clue, like, okay, so this isn't quite
Well, second if you count the shoes, but yes,
yeah,
there's but
yes,
yeah, that's
exactly.
another thing where you're like, something's off with her. Her
Yeah,
specifically, everyone else seems to be fine. But
and
Hong Chao, like, terrific performance
yes.
as chef's sort of major domo, really, with such a dry wit. And she's, I don't know if you saw the Watchmen series on HBO.
I haven't yet, but
She gives a terrific performance on that as well, and she's a scene stealer here, and she's so tiny, and her screen presence is massive.
yes.
And I love this sort of robotic serenity that she brings to the entire thing until the robot goes haywire at the end.
Oh, yeah, and I tell you what, like, if you try to ask her for anything that isn't part of the plan, I mean, the way she just coolly says no, and then there was a point when somebody asked for something and she denied it, and she leans down in their ear, and what does she say?
She says, "You will eat less than you want and more than you deserve," which I
Yes.
thought was a really interesting line.
I would say that's kind of the start of another tipping point in this movie because it goes in stages. Like the menu that is being presented to them, you start with your
It's
amuse-bouche. Actually, you start before that. We're on the boat eating an oyster with lemon caviar made from alginate, as Tyler was so kind to
yeah.
tell everybody.
The movie is served in courses, and
Yes.
as you say, it's very structured and very conceptual in that regard,
Yeah.
in how it extends and how it builds. And every course is shot and presented as it would be on one of these high concept cooking
Oh,
shows.
you get that with the text on the screen. So yes, we get the
Yeah.
chef's table set up, and we also have, of course, like I mentioned, the Seki director being the creator of that show. He also made a documentary that I really loved that I saw many years ago called Jiro Loves Sushi. And it is about this Japanese sushi chef, multi-generation sushi restaurant, and it is very exclusive. There's maybe only 8 seats in the whole place, and it is very expensive, and these people dedicate their entire lives to babying every grain of rice and massaging every piece of fish, and he's bringing his kids into this who have given up a lot to be part of this legacy, and it's a very fascinating documentary. So this guy has a huge touchstone with this whole setup and this obsession of creating this kind of environment, and he understands this
And
very
obsession is the
intimately.
word, by the way. Obsession
Yes.
is the word. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, and I think too, anybody watching this who has worked at all in the service sector, whether it is restaurant or retail, anytime you've had to publicly face and serve people will relate so intensely to so many elements of this. And I'm sitting there watching this, and my whole soul is like churning because I can relate to this on the foodie level. I can relate to this on the service level. I can relate to this on the feeling disillusioned by the people that I've somehow risen high enough to cater to. Like that element that Chef Slowick, as we will get to know him, he has become increasingly disillusioned by his art and his work over many years. He started from nothing and rose to absolute prominence and greatness, but with that, his joy has completely left him
Developed contempt for the
very much.
people that he is performing this art for, which sounds a little to me like Paul Sheldon, if you really want to come right down to it. He's
Yes.
suffering from the same disease creatively when you put your finger on it. The idea that these people who have elevated him are now people that he has come to despise and despise himself for feeding them what they want. And
You see this
yeah,
across so many spectrums, like, I don't know if this is true, very true, but it rings true. There's this thing where apparently Billy Joel, when he puts concerts on, that he doesn't fill the front seats. They don't fill the front seats. They pull people down from the bad seats to fill the front seats because he was realizing that the people that had the money to buy the frontmost seats were the most boring motherfuckers. They would sit there and do nothing, and
so
oftentimes they'd be on their phones. They're just there because they can be there. They're not there because they're really fans. They're just, "Oh, I know somebody who had tickets to the Billy Joel concert, front row. You wanna go?" "Oh, I guess."
like
Like that, where it's like, there are some people that if they could get front row seats to a Billy Joel concert, that would make their whole fucking life. But
so it's about the people who truly appreciate it,
yes.
versus the people who, again, like the older couple specifically in this, they take it for granted. And sort of earlier, you were kind of pinpointing, well, this is the moment when we start to think of something being quite wrong, but we're maybe not entirely sure yet what it is. And I
Mhm,
think if you wanted to pin it down, it's that, yeah, it's her, Elsa, saying no.
mhm.
It's because the whole thing with the bread, which is the second course, I believe,
Yeah.
and after the island, yeah. And apparently, Hawthorne, this restaurant, is known for its bread, and they have baked bread for that night.
Mhm.
And chef gives again these moving speeches with every
Yes.
course. And by the way, again, the fact that the food is photographed in this specific way, you really, if you're an appreciator of food, you give anything to just reach through that screen.
Oh,
And a little
absolutely.
of those melon balls are just, they look so gorgeous and enticing. And they need to, because we have to be sharing this experience of dining with the
Agreed.
characters, and that's how we start to see the lines start to get jagged and start to feel that fear along with them. But it's about when Elsa says no, and that makes us viscerally uncomfortable to a certain degree. Your server's not supposed to say no.
Say
They're certainly
no.
not supposed to say it that way. I mean, I don't
Right.
care if you're at a Taco Bell, but the shift in power structure in this movie is one of the most fascinating things about it, because again, you have someone who's living is ostensibly to serve people, to feed
Right.
people, who becomes so far elevated within that that he is now, it is he who is in control of the entire situation. And it's proving his point that, yeah, he gives a whole speech about how bread is such an important course and has always been a staple throughout all of humanity's history among common people, but these aren't common people except for one, which he doesn't know about yet. And so he's not serving them bread. And yeah, like, food critic wants to be in on the gag because she, again, her whole thing is wanting to feel special. Like, she
Yeah.
personally got a call from him, we find out, to
Right.
be there on that night. So she had to go because he knows how to feed into her fucking ego.
Right.
But to go to a place and expect a service, a specific service, and be told, no, you don't get to have that. One time back in the 60s, my father was in Scotland, and so he stopped into a pub, just a kind of pub that's been there for 500 years because it's
Yeah.
Scotland. My dad liked a good tumbler of scotch, just one at the end of the day. But we got up to the counter and he pointed to the Macallan and he says, I'll have Macallan on the rocks. And this old Scottish bartender sighs, gets the glass, puts ice in it, puts it down, Gets another glass, puts the Macallan in, puts it down. Dad says, "What is this?" He says, "You can ruin a Macallan if you want, but I'll maybe a party to it." Like that whole thing, I mean, he was gobsmacked. Like I
Yeah,
in America, I tell them the drink that I want and they give it
right.
to me. But he
Yeah.
also respected the hell out of it. He was like that. Hey,
I'm
okay,
telling
that
you,
makes perfect sense.
Scotch drinkers are very particular that way. That is for
Yeah.
sure. A lot of Scotch or whiskey people in general.
Yeah. So it's that
Um,
kind of a thing where like that's what's jarring, I think, that really we start to feel like because again, the diner is supposed to be in control.
I even think I read in something that they represent each of the 7 deadly sins in some
I
way.
was wondering about
Um,
that.
yeah, yeah, because you definitely have greed, you definitely have envy, and then you have the fact that the chef's mother is there, and she is just basically an old drunk who just sits there and doesn't say anything.
She's
Uh,
completely catatonic.
yeah,
Aside from
completely
reaching
out of
for
it.
wine, she is
Yeah.
just staring straight ahead, like completely, thoroughly beaten. And
And we
we
again, if
hear
she's
about
out of
that.
place and you're wondering why she's there. And
And we almost
so
ask ourselves at that moment, is she there every time? Is this like a whole part
yeah,
of the thing?
that's
And
kind of an
then unspools. Yeah, no, everyone is there that night for a very specific purpose. Everyone except one.
yes. And she, again, we start to get a little further into her head and her personality because, again, to mention the cult word again, we have a very cult like gathering here, especially when you look at the sous chefs that are preparing the meal. There's probably what about 8 of them or something that are
I
behind the
believe it
chef.
was something like that.
Yeah, and they're very militaristic, they're very precise, they're very much, not distracted, they're right to be part of it,
Discipline.
and
Yeah.
then you have the drill sergeant, the general or whatever, kinda marching along their ranks and making sure it's all in line, and he's running the show, and he's explaining everything, and he has rules. One of those rules being you're not supposed to take pictures of the food.
Oh
Well,
my god, an insane, murderous, irrational hatred when Nicholas Holt couldn't fucking keep his phone in his goddamn pocket.
oh,
I
he could
like
not.
rush the screen and start smashing it. It's like the one thing, and this guy who is here because again he is just such a fan of all
Yeah.
of such a fan of this chef, but God forbid he restrain himself from doing the thing the chef specifically asked him not to do.
Yeah, and he's out there whipping his phone out, taking pictures and all this, and then it's later discovered that they know he's taking pictures, and was it the moment when, because I wanna echo back to something you had said earlier, is whenever she says to him, because he's worried that the chef's gonna be mad at him. He wants
Yeah.
so badly to impress the chef and be like his next apprentice, and
I don't think
she
it goes to that level. I think he knows he's not gonna be an apprentice, really.
right. But he knows all the vocabulary. I think he wants
But
to feel
also
part of the crew.
and we discover later on in the movie that, first of all, no one's making it off this island alive. That's by design.
Yeah,
That's what all of this is leading up to. But
right. Right.
he knew. We
He
find
knew.
out he was the one person in this room who was not part of the staff,
Mhm.
who knew that this was going to be his last night on Earth. So what the fuck is he taking pictures of the food for? Is he going to
That's it right there. He knew he was going to die, but also when that was revealed, by the way, finally for the audience, because by the
Yeah.
time we got to that point, a lot of other shit had happened. But by the time we figure out that he knew that everybody was going to die, he came anyway. His girlfriend, he decided he couldn't bring her because he was willing to die to be able to have this experience, but he wasn't going to bring his girlfriend, but he would bring a hired escort
Well, didn't
because
he say that the girlfriend broke up with him? And that kind of
well,
doesn't surprise me, really.
that's right. I thought he had you're right. Maybe she had broken up with him, but he had to still come because or he wanted to still come, but he couldn't come alone because it was another part of the rule of this place is you got to bring somebody. There's no like other than the chef's mother. There's no lone diners in this restaurant.
Right.
So he hires her, but how shitty is that? She didn't get a choice. She was just like she thought she was just coming on a job because yeah, again, she's a hired escort, and so you get the sense that she's not your standard lower end sex worker. She, like the chef, has climbed through the ranks in her position to be considered of a higher caliber. I would say maybe not like Stormy Daniels caliber, but maybe like I'm trying to think of a really well-known paid sex worker type person. I don't know. I don't follow that realm too much, but she's more up there than many, I will say that.
The thing about that, because first of all, quick impression of men. Oh, does someone need to die? Hire a sex worker. No one will miss them and no one will give a fuck.
Right.
I mean, and you see that in It Follows too, and always in real life
Yeah.
as well, because obviously, like as serial killers, who do they always start with? So that's just such the fucking male perspective on this shit that
Mhm.
am I surprised? Especially since this guy's such a completely self-involved asswipe. And yeah, since he knew he'd been corresponding with the chef for 8 months, we find out.
Yeah.
He was probably just getting into this with every part of his active brain, and girlfriend was probably like, "Fuck off,"
Right.
which makes perfect sense, definitely. But yeah, that. But also the thing is, I at no point get the sense because I've known a decent number of sex workers, and I didn't get the sense that she was in any sort of elevated
You
position.
didn't think so?
Here's
I
how I
think
know.
she's not giving blowjobs for $5 in a back
Not
alley
for
somewhere.
$5, but here's how I know. Because somebody who has like a higher end clientele knows, for example, that if you are invited to show up for something like this, again, you're not going to wear ducks. It was probably a struggle to even get her to wear the fucking gown.
Yeah.
But whereas somebody who's on the upper end, they'll have those gowns and they'll have those shoes and they'll show up because that's part of it. And you don't need to be on the higher end to get a guy like the
Oh,
old.
Jesus, no,
I
not
mean,
him. He would pick somebody that he would think, well, if he can afford to do this, then he probably he can afford to own a Paco jet, then he could afford to pay maybe $500 to this woman to accompany him. Okay, so
but 500 is a
he's
pretty like low to standard amount for
okay,
people.
so she's like a Chevy Malibu of a sex worker as
Oh, we're
opposed to like
comparing them
a
to cars now?
I
That's
mean, sure,
terrible.
I'm like class levels here.
Right, I gotcha. No, that was what I got from her, which
She's like
again
an,
is funny given how she looks because she looks like she would be very high end. But yeah, no, of course he would just she was a sex worker. Yeah, he's a piece of shit.
she has what I absolutely love about this because she ends up becoming she's both audience surrogate
Yes.
while also being the one she's not programmed in any of this shit. She doesn't have any of the sort of exposure to any of these assholes. So again, another probably a hint that yeah, she isn't like super high dollar, but at the same time, she's the one who asserts the boundaries here. So whenever he's worried that he's pissed off the chef for taking pictures of his food, she very correctly states like you're paying him to serve you. Why are you so worried? Why do you care if he even likes you? You're paying him. She states this very plainly because that's what you would say.
She's the sane and grounded voice in all of this because
Yes.
all of these other people, like I said, are caricatures of privilege, and she is
Mhm.
clearly not.
Yeah,
I mean, so it makes sense that she's the only one who, again, is saying the emperor has no
and
clothes.
she's not eating the food, and I'll tell you what,
She doesn't care.
who notices that though? The chef,
Of
and of
course.
course, he comes over and he says, "You're not eating your food." And he sounds very sad about that. In fact, he says, "It wounds me. I take my work very seriously, and it wounds me that you're not eating your food." And she's just saying, "I'm not hungry." And then he tries to insist or something. She's like, "No, I know perfectly well whether or not I'm capable of eating. I'm fine. Leave me alone." And so it's again, it's that power balance is very shifted because you don't expect to be harassed by restaurant staff. Maybe they will say, if you do send an uneaten plate back, was everything okay? Was it to your liking? And maybe there'll be a discussion there, but it almost sounded a little more confrontational than that. Like it was uncomfortable. And again, like another signal that there's something else going on here. Uh,
That's when starts to, I think that's when he knows that out of all of these people in this room, she doesn't belong. And if she doesn't belong, that's a problem given where this evening is going to go because he has no problem with his staff committing mass suicide, with committing suicide himself, with killing these very specifically awful people in his mind.
oh, he this whole night. Yeah.
This is the thing that throws it off. And so I think in the rewatch, I think from that point forward, he does seem aggressive. And there are times when he even comes across as quite sinister and threatening, of course. And he
Hmm.
does it so well. And by the way, Ray Fiennes, like you said, this might be my favorite of all of his wonderful performances because he finds that way to combine humor and malice so nuanced, like he did it in this. He definitely did it in Bruges. He did it in it wasn't a comedy, but Schindler's List, there was still that kind of fiendish, maniacal glint to him. He's coming on heavy because he needs answers. Because he needs to solve this mystery so he knows how to proceed. But I think That's the moment from that point forward. What he's really trying to do is find an excuse to let her go. He doesn't want to kill somebody who's basically of a service staff like he was to a certain degree.
Right. And that is a kinship that they kind of have because as the movie progresses, I think we'll have to really explain this hard pivot point between the first and the second act of the film because I think it is the fourth. Is it the fourth course where the mess, the course called the mess happens? And that's when we have a sous chef who comes out from the kitchen.
Jeremy,
Yes, and while this is all happening, by the way, the rest of the staff is laying around things on the floor and putting plastic down, and they're doing all this
uh
setting the stage, and we're like, "What the hell's going on?"
they're plating him. They're plating him,
Yeah, yeah, and even
of
if you're
course.
getting an idea already of kinda where this is headed because, again, we get this elaborate speech given by the chef saying that Jeremy is good, but he'll never be great. And he'll never be as great as me, but he's always wanted to have my greatness, and talks about how he's just he has
Jeremy is standing stock still, straight ahead, like an army private. And when he says, "Isn't that right, Jeremy, that you're not going to ascend to the level that I uh, occupy?" No, chef. Yeah.
yeah,
So your life has. Do you want my life? He asks. Not just the prestige, not just the acclaim. Do you want to be me? Do you
yeah,
really want that for yourself? No, chef. So
mhm.
there's only one thing to do, isn't there? And that's when Jeremy whips the gun out, puts it in his mouth, and blam, right in front of everyone. But
Plastic caught everything behind him, so
that's when we actually, I think, make the hard connection of, oh, it's a cult.
and we might not be getting out of here
And
alive.
so what happens, of course, is that yeah, almost everyone freaks out. Uh, Holt's reaction to it is perfect because he's just like, "Huh, well, didn't see that coming." And he just keeps eating, and it becomes even funnier in retrospect when you realize that
He already
it wasn't.
knew.
At the time, you're thinking, "Oh, he thinks that it's staged." No, he does. He knows it's not staged. He was just like, "Oh, that was a part of the dining experience." And of course, the food critic insists that it's all being staged for her benefit specifically because
Oh, yes, yes.
everything's about her. And even after the older man gets his ring finger cut off because he tries to leave, even then she's still like, ah, that's all part of the act. I'm sure it's all just for me. And that's when what you're talking about, where she talks to Chef and, am I going to live? And he says, we're all going to die tonight. So we need to know where to seat you. We need to know whether your place is with those who give or those who take.
And he gives her what, 15 minutes, I think, to decide her choice. And of course, another course happens at that point. Yes or no? It's the sort of impromptu course. Isn't this where we get Tyler in the kitchen? Isn't that around that period? I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So this wasn't a planned part of the menu. So by this point, things have started to go a little awry. They're still mostly on the rails because the chefs are still cooking and shit's still happening and people haven't left yet. But what was the moment though that they decided to bring Tyler into the kitchen to try to cook? Because that was the
That
thing.
was definitely after the finger chopping scene.
Okay, it was after the finger chop.
Yeah,
Okay.
because now everyone's pretty much kind of losing it, except for Tyler, except for Holt's character, Tyler. He's just sitting there eating, looking like he's having the time of his life, except for the fact that he's fretting that he piss off the chef. The thing is, between moments like that and also toward the end, when Elsa comes on him, and because she has it in her psychotic, paranoid head that somehow Anya Taylor Joy is going to replace her,
Yeah.
and it's the funniest, weirdest. You're all going to die in a couple of hours, but this is what you're fucking focused on. Is that for
Yeah.
that last couple of hours? Like,
Yeah.
I, you put it that way. If you only have the last couple of hours, then that becomes very important to you. But it's like the psychotic
I
nature.
mean, if you're unhinged enough to come up with a concept like this, shit's gonna happen. It's almost like a paradox. Like you can't be crazy enough to plan something like this and be sane enough to hold it all together.
Chef is practically a Batman villain when you come right down to it, in terms of how he's structured all of this. So, but he can't have that one thing that throws it off. He can't have it, or it starts to, as you say, unravel on him. And I think that he had planned to a certain degree to take Tyler into the kitchen.
I mean, he'd already been corresponding with him. It was already quite clear that he didn't like him, and things got kind of messed up because obviously he brought this girl here
Mhm.
So he definitely had reasons that made sense in his own head and makes sense for the sense of the story itself.
The reason he gave Tyler when he's talking to him about all the culinary stuff that he knows, even though he's really a dilettante, and he knows it obviously, and he hates himself for it to some degree, and he wants to be more than that, but that's all that he is. And
Mhm.
it, I mean, we've already seen by that point that what happened with Jeremy, who was actually an extremely talented chef. He
Right,
just was never going to be a genius.
right,
So then Chef leans over and says to him, "You, from knowing all of this and need to be so behind the scenes, you are why there is no more mystery to what I do."
right.
And that's
Yes.
after he's had Tyler say, "Just cook anything. Like, we have everything. What would you like
Yeah,
to cook?" Tyler hooks up, and you just looking at it, it's fucking horrible. It's
right.
horrible to serve lamb like that. What a terrible thing to do
It
to it.
was barely cooked. It was not he threw it in the pan. Oh, and he cut up leeks. He didn't even, like, clean them properly. You're supposed to cut leeks, like, lengthwise and get all the sand out of the layers. He just, like, chops them up and throws them in a skillet with it. So anybody who cooks anything competently is watching this cringing.
I mean, catastrophically fails when he's invited. And before that, I mean, Chef makes a really just a big deal of singling him out, putting the chef jacket on him, and writing Tyler's name on it to customize it.
And
You know,
Tyler fails and presents his meal. He knows he's failed. And then the chef leans over and whispers in his ear. We don't know what he says. It's sort of like the briefcase in Pulp Fiction or what happens at the end of what was the movie with Bill Murray and Scarlett
lots of
Johansson?
translation. Yeah,
Yeah, Lost in Translation, similar kind of thing. We don't need to know, but we know the outcome. It was
yeah.
bad enough that he, with slumped resignation, Tyler trudges off and hangs himself, which we
Thing again.
find later.
Yeah, and not much later, just a few minutes.
Yeah.
The funny thing again, it is the plan for one to expire at the end of this meal. But
Yes.
within that, suicide is still made to be a meaningful act, first with Jeremy, because it's on those very specific terms. He does not get to be part of the end masterpiece. Again, he is not great, and he knows that. So this is his contribution, is to help set the stage for it.
Would Tyler Do you think he trudged off sadly because he wasn't gonna get to have more food? Do you think that was why he was so dejected really more than anything? Like, he wasn't gonna get to finish his meal.
That all Chef would have had to say to him is that these other people are going to get to finish their meal and you are not. That's it. Nothing left to live for. And he's also told probably this thing I'm doing at the end, you're not going to be part of it. And it broke him. It fucking broke him. We can see it. But no, I think you are so on this. I think you solved it.
I think totally on accident, but you're absolutely right. It was definitely when I was thinking about that and something that you said clicked in my head just about, how everything about his reasoning for coming here was to taste the food, even when people are blowing their brains out, when people are running around on an island. And well, no, he didn't get no, he did get a chance to do that because there was another course.
He wanted to stay behind, but he was forced to run along with the other men because
This
it
was one
yeah.
of my favorite. This was one of my favorite courses. So we have a female sous chef who is brought out. They all have to go outside. So they're all standing out in the entrance to the restaurant outside. He introduces the female sous chef and said, I sexually harassed her. No, she says that he sexually harassed her, tried to sleep with her, and then cold shouldered her for like 8 months straight.
Yeah, she's presenting this while he's standing
Yes.
aside and nodding because it's all true. Yeah.
And so then he steps forward and she basically delivers a punishment to him and stabs him in the thigh with a pair of scissors, which is very similar to what the chef claims that he did to his abusive father. Because that was one thing that he makes clear as to why his mother is actually there after everybody knows that they're going to die at the end of this thing, is that he brought her there. His father used to abuse him. She did nothing. And he has a deep well of rage toward her as well. So now we know why mom is there. So then he gets the same punishment that his father got. And then she pulls the blade out and then wipes the blood across the front of his chef jacket. This
Mm.
big red handprint that stays there for the rest of the film.
Yes.
And
Where it's
then, yeah, all the men are told that they have to run and try not to be caught by any of the other chefs. And yeah, Tyler, who hasn't had his moment of dejection yet, he doesn't want to run, but he's like, yeah, you too, buddy.
Yeah, he
You-
wants to be again, everyone wants to be in on it. Everyone wants to be
yes.
in on the experience.
And that reminds me too, because what does the chef say? It was probably about two-thirds of the way through it, where he says, you actually could have fought
All could
harder
have
to
fought harder to
leave.
leave. You
Why
probably
haven't
could have.
you? Why is that? I want to ask you that. What, I mean, why didn't they fight harder? Really?
Before I even get into that, I wanted to say with that course, that scene where he's
Hmm.
stabbed in the leg, it's so important that he is not upset about it. He
Hmm.
understands clearly that he has this and probably much worse coming to him.
Yes.
And I think that's what's happening in that scene is that he has come to really all of this entire psychotic plan that he's set in motion is, I think, a big part of it because he's come to loathe himself
Hmm.
in understanding that by dedicating his entire life to this art, he has lost a tremendous amount of his own humanity. And he knows he's become a man on a terrible power trip. And he clearly used that to try to sleep with her. And that's one person out of God knows how many in decades.
A lot of this, by the way, brings out a lot of the truths of the restaurant industry. You listen to anybody who's worked in kitchens, and especially women, it's common, unfortunately. It's still a very male dominated industry. And so that I think brought a lot of that to the fore. Again, anybody who's worked in restaurant and was probably watching this movie going, they finally get it. They finally bringing all this stuff up. And how many people is she representing right there?
A lot.
I just, that's such a
And again,
beautiful
it's gotta
moment.
be it's gotta be the stab in the thigh again
Hmm.
because he has become a brute like his father
Yes.
was, which is the one thing he probably never wanted to be. And
Right.
all of this was going to just elevate him so that would never happen to him. And instead, that caused that to happen. But to answer
Yeah.
your question, though, about what he says, you all could have fought harder. I think it's because it took them all so long, first of all,
Hmm.
to understand what was happening to them that by the time they realized it, they felt utterly trapped and
Yeah.
completely. I think he's clearly a master of psychology with the way that he chooses to present himself and his food and his restaurant. All of it is built not just on nourishment and flavor, but on manipulating your mind to
Yes.
appreciate the experience to its utmost. He's clearly done a tremendous number of fascinating stunts because if he hadn't, the food critic wouldn't have spent so long sitting there saying, "Oh yeah, no, he's a showman. God knows what the hell else this guy has done of this type." And everyone just let him get away with it because he's an eccentric chef, certainly not a cult leader or a crazy person or anything. So I think that's to a certain degree why they didn't try harder to leave. But I also think that Chef believes or wants to believe on some level that these people understand, if not consciously, then subconsciously, that they're fucking despicable and that everything that's happened and that everything that's going to happen, they
It's
know that
something they deserve
they have
already.
a reflex action to try to not die, but ultimately not much of one when you consider the fact that these people are just a bunch of absolutely well
Well,
dressed scum.
oh, and that's the thing too, is I think they've spent so much of their lives being catered to and being given everything. They simply don't have any concept in their heads about fighting for themselves or fighting for a greater cause because they don't know anything that they've done in that realm has been a form of pandering, anything to make themselves look better in the public eye. So they just, it's not a part of their arsenal. Not like it is a part of Anya's arsenal because she's still actively in a mode of self preservation at this point. Like, how is she going to get out of this? She's the only one really at this point thinking to herself that she's got to figure out a way to get out of this.
Yeah, because again, she is still very much moored to the real world, and she
Yes.
is a fighter. I mean,
Yeah.
she's scrappy. These other people either never were or lost it a long time ago. And we talked about this a little bit earlier on, but I think it might be like in a movie full of terrific scenes. I think it might be my favorite when it's the older couple
Mm,
when because he kind of reveals in his own way to these different people why they're here. And the older couple, that's my favorite when he says, "You have had the privilege of eating here 11 time. Most people don't get to eat here once. Can you name any of the dishes I've served you in all that time? I took the time and the trouble to introduce them all quite thoroughly every single time. And instead of hearing it or appreciating it, you shovel them in and you shit them out. And it
Mhm.
means nothing to you. And man, I get it.
Yes.
I'm kind of on his side at that point.
Yes.
I get the rage.
Oh, big time. Big time. What I find through all of a lot of this movie is how I felt sympathy for his character deeply. But just on that realm of spending years and years honing your craft and trying to rise up the ranks and make something of yourself, and then that disillusionment and that jadedness that sets in over time and dealing with the problems in your business and the problems in the industry and I mean, my fucking God, I'm just so burned out. That feeling is something I've dealt with a lot in my career. And so, yeah, I'm vibing with him, even though I'm not really on board with his method. I would definitely say I understand it to a certain degree of like, this is something I would imagine in my head that I would love to do. But
I mean, in a way, it all makes perfect sense when you
yeah.
look at it. It's a terrible, insane sense, but it absolutely makes sense that this is how he has lived. This is how he's going to go out
And
to make these big presentations of courses. And yeah, I mean, yeah, in his mind, and yeah, it made perfect sense, I'm sure.
in the moment that I related the most to him as well was the scene when Anya gets into his living quarters. So
Hmm.
she's sent off to go retrieve something and bring it back. It's all part
Yes.
of the show. It's this big barrel, which we can guess is part of the elaborate light show that'll be happening at the end of the movie. But she goes off to get that and she gets a peek inside there and sees various pictures
Yes.
showing his life. He had a wife and kid at one point. He started off flipping burgers at a greasy spoon and he had a very bright smile on his
Yeah, he
face.
looked happy. He
He
looked
looked
happy.
very happy, and I found myself remembering when I was writing short stories for free magazines and not making a fucking dime,
Yeah.
and feeling like I was on top of the world. Like, I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. It was right around the period of, like, 2013, 2014 or so, where I felt like, between 2008 and that period, that was, like, my brightest period as a creator, I still feel to this day, because I hadn't gotten involved yet in the commercial side of things. And
Yes.
so I was still pure creation, pure, like, I wasn't thinking about markets or audiences or any of that stupid shit. I was just like throwing everything in my brain and in my dark pit of my soul onto the page. And that's all that mattered. And I can't get there again. And I'm pissed off about it. And so that boiling rage that he exhibits so well that he just keeps like clamped down, but you can just see it coming out of every pore of his face. Like, I get it, but then, like, behind all of that is this, like, sadness. It's just that mix of emotion that Ray Fiennes just somehow manages to exude even whenever he's not speaking. He's just so fucking good. I'm just sitting there just going like, "I get you, man. Oh my god, I so get you."
What can I say? Rosebud is a sled for a reason.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, this specific theme, it never goes away. It only
Right.
takes different because it's always relevant. The idea of success
Yeah.
not really being what we wanted it to be and
Mhm.
becoming a trap instead of freeing us from what we think
Yes.
is a trap.
Yes.
Realizing, I mean, and usually I would find that corny, and usually I'm not a huge fan of the whole, oh, we're gonna learn because they found a scrapbook or a bunch of pictures and tell the story handily in a few minutes that way. Like
Okay.
Misery, the book was definitely guilty of that, and so was The Shining. But it's kind of lazy. But I don't think it's lazy here because
Right.
it's sell it. They completely sell this movie, and because yeah, it's young Ray Fiennes and just the boyish kind of charm.
And we
And of
were
course, yeah,
never gonna get that point of view any other way, I don't think, and we
I
were
mean,
never gonna get in there otherwise.
probably not. And she
Yeah,
certainly wasn't because that's the
no.
final clue that allows her to liberate herself. But before we get to that, though, I also wanted to mention because there was kind of a big set piece we didn't really touch on, which was the angel investor. It was mentioned several times. We have, yeah, these finance young assholes, three of them at a table, who clearly work for this angel investor. Just like with Tyler, they
Yep.
think that they're separate from the rest of the people here somehow. In
Mhm.
fact, if you come right down to it, most of the people in that room are going in with that mentality that
Oh, yeah.
somehow this is a different experience for
I'm
me.
special.
I'm special exactly. For the older couple, it's all their money. For the movie star, of course, it's his fame. For
Yes.
Tyler, it's his knowledge of food. And for these guys, it's because, yeah, they think that they can just have anything and get away with everything
Mhm.
because they work for this man. And then comes this fantastic spectacle where this angel investor is tied up and a pair of big white angel wings is mounted on him, and he's slowly lowered on a crane into the
Into
water
water.
in front of everyone, drowning his fucking asses. As Chef talks about the fact that ever since this person became his patron, they started making completely unreasonable demands and basically felt as though that kitchen belonged to them. It doesn't. It belongs to Chef, period. And
Mhm.
finally, when this guy goes under the water, he says, "And now I'm free." But before that happens, I wanted to mention, because I had forgotten this after I saw it the first time, Peter Gross playing the sommelier. I knew that guy a little bit to say hi to, like 20 years ago at the
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, in Chicago. He was a legend even then. He was known for doing these long-running two-man improv shows with PJ Jagodowski, who was his comedy partner. And then they two of them did all those Sonic fast food commercials. I don't know if you've probably seen.
Yeah. Mhm.
But so to see him pop up in this was kind of freaky. But what I really loved was because he's not a big presence on the screen, as a sommelier should not be.
Right.
He's just basically serving the wine and talking about the nature of it and the attributes of it very calmly in this soothing tone.
Not just a vineyard, a single row of vines. That's how
And
special this wine is.
with a faint aftertaste of longing and regret. And of course, I know that she says,
Yes.
"Oh, my favorite, longing and regret." But then just as they're setting up this angel investor, like we see him hanging on the hook with for some reason, the camera goes to Peter Gross and he's got this like giddy smile on his face, like, we fucking hate this guy. What the hell happened?
I never noticed that.
Did the angel investor insult the fucking wine or something? Because he looks like all of these other people are fairly serene. And Chef is even, this is a big moment for him. He's very austere, but Gross is like, drown
Well,
fucker.
and Chef also another reason too that they were doing this, and this again, like, I love these big elaborate movies that, like, show these elaborate deaths happening for the most trivial reasons. Hot Fuzz did that to a great degree, had all these deaths happening, but we thought it was this big conspiracy, and it was all whittled down that we just didn't like him for various reasons. And it was like, why did they not like him? Because he always asked for substitutions on the menu, and there are no substitutions at the Hawthorne, which is what he screamed as the guy was being lowered into the water. So think about
Amen.
that next time you ask for a substitution on the menus, you troglodytes. You get it as is, as the chef intended. And I have been to restaurants where, and not even fine dining restaurants. I've been to some of the nastiest, like, hole in the wall restaurants that say no substitution. So that happens across the board. But I agree that was a very interesting scene. We're getting closer to the sort of end of it, right? Because at this point, she's already got Anya's already got her ultimatum about which side she's going to be on. And then she goes and has a conversation with Chef in his office, and where they have a bit of a heart to heart, and he figures out who she is. Like, I know a fellow service worker when I see one.
And he's careful to call her that. There's no judgment here, even slightly,
Not at
on
all.
the fact that she's a sex worker. And by the way, she may be a sex worker, but it's the diners who are really the whores when you come down to it.
Oh, for sure.
I think
Absolutely.
honestly, like, nothing wrong with her character, and the rest of these people are just beasts and slobs for the most part. But then we find out what was going on between her and the older
That's
gentleman.
right, because the older gentleman of our older couple here, that's she's got multiple involvements here, and which makes it even more interesting, right? Because that wasn't supposed to happen
Yeah,
at
well, again,
all. So she had performed services for the older gentleman at one time. And of course, the wife doesn't know this. This movie has a great way of just adding a little bit of an extra punch to an ingredient to really make it stand out. So it wasn't just enough that she was his escort and had to sit and watch him jerk off
even
while
have
he
sex with him.
cried.
Not
Yeah,
even have sex with him.
but he wanted her to pretend that she was his daughter while
Yeah,
he did that. What a
yeah.
sicko,
Well,
right?
first of all, that goes back to what you were saying earlier. He could have hired $5,000, $10,000 a night, but finding someone who looks like his daughter enough to pull that off, that's really the more important thing.
Yeah.
And
And
again, it's not, again, it'd be one thing if we found out that they had more standard sex, but given the fact that we've had our share in real life of
mhm,
people whose this specific behavior being described of jerking off in front of a woman who's not really into it,
right.
um,
Right.
there's that. Once again, we're playing with power structures here. We're
Mhm.
playing with power structures. Who's really in control of these given situations? And the guy is paying for the act, but it doesn't work unless she's able to really give him what he wants. And what's a more powerless situation to a certain degree, or powerful, depending on how you look at it, than a dude beating off in front of somebody who,
Right.
again, is not hip to it? Like, so that's a
Yeah.
strange imposition, but
Mhm.
and it's just sort of who's really in control of these situations. And so again, they play cat's cradle with these themes.
Oh,
Mm.
yeah.
And yet very simple. They're not being too showy about it. They're not saying, "Hey, look how smart we are."
Mhm.
They're just doing it and getting it into a rhythm and a groove.
One thing I found really great too, when I was reading about some of the production notes on this and everything was the director, he gave everybody an opportunity to do a freebie take after a real successful take, and so it invited people to do some improv, and so
Yeah.
there are a lot of lines in this that weren't originally meant to be, and one thing I absolutely love, another one of my favorite courses from this was the taco
Yeah,
scene.
and that's certainly, I mean, that's
Yeah,
of
'cause
course.
exactly, they bring out probably one of the more substantial meals that they got to eat courses that they got to eat, if assuming they ate it, which I think only Nicholas Hoult ate, really, but they bring out these tortillas that were, of course, were house-made by heirloom, masa or whatever for these, tortillas, but they've been laser printed with photographs of various bad things that each of these people have done. So at the older couple's table, we have him sitting at a table, assuming with her, with the young woman. And, but of course, at that point in the movie, we're like, we don't know who that is. But later on, we find out that is, in fact, her. And then on some of the other tables, like the tech bros, they have financial statements printed on theirs that show some embezzlement going on and some other bad things happening with the money side of things. And then the critic, she has pictures of restaurants that she closed or
Mhm.
helped close due to her reviews. And so there are a lot, they're all being confronted. Oh, and the picture of Nicholas Hoult taking pictures of his food. That was like his sin that
Wow.
was printed. I found that so entertaining, but the whole Taco Tuesday line that the chef said, that was one of those improv lines. He just threw that in there, so they kept that in the movie, and so there are a lot of different some of those really funny dialogue moments, a lot of those were allowed by the director, which I thought I always love when they get an opportunity, when a director allows actors to be creative like that. Yeah, as the night wears on and it gets crazier and crazier, we're getting more and more unhinged. Let's talk about real quick the end of the maitre d' of Elsa, because when they sent off Anya, they're like, "Go get this barrel of stuff and bring it back." And while she's off doing that, when she gets back, is that when she encounters Elsa?
Also followed her to the cottage, which
Yeah,
Elsa
she
is
saw her
also
get
not
in.
allowed to be in, although
Mhm,
she probably has been a time or two. I don't know.
mhm.
And as I said, we've got this robotic kind of calm performance from Elsa right up until this point when that, again, the positronic brain net becomes damaged by something or other, and she just starts swinging the knife and screaming, "You're not going to replace me! You're not going to replace me!" Like like some kind of Stepford gone wrong. And it's intense, a very intense fight between those two in the cottage kitchen.
Yeah.
And I love Anya Taylor Joy's reaction to when she stabs Elsa,
Oh, yeah.
because even if you're in a situation like that, realistically, you're gonna have a moment of fucking horror of like, "What the fuck? I just killed somebody." If
Yeah.
you've done it before, I would think. And so that little touch of realism where another movie might have, like, given her a look of satisfaction or something like that, no,
No,
Kino
she's freaking out. It's
is
everywhere, and
yeah, it was quite the gory scene, definitely, and, again, just brilliantly choreographed, brilliantly filmed.
and
Perfect.
let's just say RIP to the Paco jet because it hits the floor, and I just assume it's probably broken at that point, which
Yeah,
Poor
because I
Paco
mean,
Jed.
because the cottage isn't gonna be on fire at the end probably, and so that would have been a mother of an estate sale, I would
No doubt, man. It's
love to have been part of that. But the funny
uh,
thing too is because you mentioned that Tyler's quote unquote sin that gets etched onto the tortillas,
mhm.
him taking the photos of the food just a few minutes earlier.
Yeah.
Fantastic, by the way, because it's eerie that they'd be able to do that so quickly. But also, you've got to know that in terms of this kind of thing, there's probably 5,000 things that they could have taken a photo of him doing before he ever got to the island to
Yeah.
show us and to show him what a dick that he is. But this is the one that's going to hit home for him the most. That,
Yes.
and also is representative of all the rest of it, of pretending to be such an appreciator of all of this when really you don't respect it the way it needs to be respected on it.
Yeah. I love, though, when you mentioned the reasonings when he says, "You've removed the mystery and the mystique from my craft, and so therefore you must die." Like, that kinda aspect. Again, it's just like, I never thought of in but it makes sense. Like, I was like, "Oh, shit. I never thought about it that way."
Again,
God.
this is Paul Sheldon getting his revenge on the constant reader instead of the other way around.
Oh my god. That's so
That's how he's expressing that to a certain degree.
I love it so much, and what I really love too is, of course, she had to get in there to see the things that she saw about him so that she knew how to manipulate the chef. So, this is absolutely what I love, because by the time we're getting to the final course, we're getting close to the final course here, and she knows that she really is kinda, like, separate from this group. He knows that, but at this point, she had decided to go with the givers rather than the takers, right? But then she realized that she has a ticket out of this thing, and I'm skipping over some things because at this point, I don't there's some things you just need to re-experience for yourselves as people go and rewatch this thing. But she does the clap, 'cause every course is set off by a chef clapping, like one loud clap, and then
Chef
everybody.
claps, kitchen staff comes to attention. Yes.
Yes, and so she claps. She stands up and turns around, and she starts off by saying that the food basically sucks. It's cooked with no love. It is clinical, it's sterile. She's calling out all the things about this meal and everything that is wrong with it, and she's
Boring.
not
She
wrong.
uses the word boring, which
Boring. Yes.
she knows
Yes.
just what to say. Absolutely wound him to the quick. And it's again, she's not Hannibal Lecter. She's not some master manipulator, but you got to figure she's probably a decent student of human nature, given what she does for a living.
Oh. Oh, yeah. Oh,
And,
yeah.
yeah,
She knows how to get under his skin, you
she's
know.
not afraid of him. Like she's
Mhm.
afraid of this situation that they're all in.
Yeah, she definitely doesn't wanna die, but she
Yeah,
definitely shows herself as someone with just a lot of insight, a lot of savvy, a lot of similarity. Probably, again, these 2 are kindred spirits in a way. They're just on different tracks
yeah,
in different places in their lives, but once she says those things to him, and by the end of it, she says, "And I'm still fucking hungry."
yes.
And then he comes down and he's being the restaurateur like he should be. And he asks her, what would she like? And so she says, a cheeseburger.
Mhm.
Then he asks her what kind of cheese. He asked her how she wants it cooked. And then she asked if she could have fries. And then he asked her what kind of fries. And he gives a holder. And she said, how much will that set me back? 9.95.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, God damn, that's a great deal.
These days, these
And
days. It is.
yeah,
And I'll
and
tell you something else is that right after I rewatched this, yeah, I had to make a cheeseburger for myself.
oh, I
It
mean,
looked just like it.
I absolutely love that's my favorite style of cheeseburger. He
Yeah.
kinda does the Oklahoma style with the onions on the bottom of the patty as you're smashing it on the griddle, American cheese, and he says, "Oh, yes, American cheese is the best cheese for cheeseburgers because it doesn't split when it melts," and we're like, "Yes, that is the correct answer." It is a
Right?
point
Like
of
we knew we loved it. We just didn't know why we loved it.
right.
And the thing is that again, she's able to do this because this character, the chef's psyche, is so beautifully constructed over the course of this whole thing to again get
Mhm.
us to really understand him. And so she is again the only one who's able to pull this off. The rest of them are trying to beg and buy their way out of this whole situation, and that's not going to work on this guy. But
Right.
what she knows is that this is a person, what we know is that this is a person who loves and hates himself in equal measure.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
if you're able to speak to the part that hates himself, what's wrong with him, and knows that he has to die and that he has to die spectacularly, the fatalism is drawn out of that. The way she plays it is just masterful, and she gives him what he wanted. What he wanted was a reason to let her go. This is the reason. Give me my burger and leave. It doesn't matter. He's not going to prison or anything. He's going to fucking die with the rest of them.
And I
So,
think he wanted that little bit of joy of cooking something for someone who
yes.
wanted it because he hasn't done that in so long. He cooks for effect, he cooks for status, he cooks for all these esoteric reasons that people in general don't relate to. A lot of people just want good food because they're hungry and they just want tastiness. They're not thinking beyond that. And what food represents that better than a cheeseburger? Because I just feel like for me, that's the food I go to when I feel awful. Like, when I am at the end of my rope, it's like and I can't think of anything else, I can almost always go for a cheeseburger. It is just to me the one of the perfect meals that we've devised as creatures, and it's a humble meal, it's a simple meal, it's a delicious meal. And, of course, he makes it in a way that just makes your mouth water, like, "I must have this cheeseburger," and the smile on his face as he's doing it, as he's going through those motions is just a beautiful thing. And it's a shame that he couldn't have that moment to, I don't know, end the whole charade, as it were. Oh,
Well, no,
the
then he really would go to prison or to the nut.
right. The plan is still on. He's in
Can
this
only
thing.
end for him and for everyone else involved basically one way. But
Mhm.
what she's given him a gift which
Mhm.
buys her freedom, which is that before he dies, which he will, he got to feel this one last time. And
Yeah,
that's worth letting her go for. And
I
again, like we were saying at the beginning, it doesn't have to be thousands of dollars and multiple courses and cute platings. And at the end of the day, sometimes the best meal you've ever had is
mhm.
a Whopper because that was what you needed at that moment.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the other day I've been having trouble with food lately because of medication I've been taking. It's making me sick. And so, like, sometimes I'm starving, sometimes I can't eat. And when I can eat, I'm very happy because, like, oh my god, food's wonderful. So the other day I went to Waffle House. Just Waffle House, man. It was the best goddamn meal I'd had in weeks. And it wasn't the best just by quality wise, but to my soul, and everything my body said it needed, it was the thing. We're talking like a $12 meal from a restaurant whose, reputation is synonymous with fistfights and cockroaches. But I wanted that Waffle House more than anything in the world, and that was gonna do it for me. And so food is just an interesting medium. It's an artistic medium, it's a feeding ourselves emotional medium, and the cheeseburger just symbolized that humanity. And it was beautiful, and I do love it when he brought it to her and she took a bite and she loved it, and then when she said, "My eyes are bigger than my stomach," which yes,
They certainly are,
much
Anya.
bigger. That's yeah, she could put maybe one eyeball in that stomach. And she said, "Can I get this to go?" And he says, "Of course." And he puts it in a doggy bag and gives her a gift bag
Mhm.
because all the diners, again, he knew everybody was going to die, but they got gift bags with house-made granola and some other thing. Like, wasn't a finger from the investor?
Yes, and also the menu itself.
The menu
Copy of
itself.
the menu, which he uses later as at the end as a napkin. But I
Yeah.
mean, even as he's doing this, because this is, as we've said, sort of there are several morals to this story, but the big one is that when she's making this demand of him, he is still able to say this thing about the cheese, which is informative.
Hmm.
He is able to give her the assurance that this will be like the first cheeseburger you ever had, that you loved, that this is the proof here is that this is still can be an exercise. Even
Hmm.
the simplest food can be an exercise if you care
Right.
all, then it doesn't, the fact that it's simple, doesn't make it bad or doesn't
Well,
make it cheap or easy necessarily.
and
Even
the whole thing about cooking with love. I feel that's one of those things. It's a saying and the phrase that's tossed around a lot. But and it's so much that I think it's lost its meaning for a lot of people. They just hear that and they take it for granted because they're used to eating food maybe cooked by people in their homes. So they don't think about that. But when you really are truly, for instance, like every Thanksgiving, when I'm up at 5 in the morning and I'm getting the turkey out and I'm making pies and I fucking hate making pie crust. I hate
well,
it with a passion, Josh. It
it's a
is
pain in the
my
ass.
It is literally my least favorite cooking chore, but I do it every Thanksgiving. Why? Because I love my goddamn family and I want them to have real butter pie crust. And I could buy real butter pie crust at the fancy market for $10, but I'm not going to do that because I'm also cheap. So, but I do it though because there's something about that labor of making something that with your own hands, it's beautiful and delicious, and you look at your people eating it and enjoying it, and there's a satisfaction that comes out of that. And even if you're just feeding yourself, there is a satisfaction that goes like, I cared about myself enough to make a decent meal for myself today, and I'm going to fucking celebrate that because a lot of times we don't do that for ourselves. A lot of times it is literally like, what can I run and grab or order? What bullshit can I grab from a 7-Eleven tonight? That kind of thing. So,
Food
uh,
is one of the most primal things of not just humanity, but of life itself.
right.
So again, you don't need to be fancy to have a connection to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I love that you had that experience that you had. I want to have that experience one day. I would love, for instance, because the food designer in this is the amazing, astounding chef Dominique Crenn. And she has a restaurant out in San Francisco. And she's also the only female chef in America who has 3 Michelin stars.
Oh,
Yes, she designed every plate, and in fact, that first dish with the melon and the snow and that whole thing, or not the first dish, but that course, she has that very similar dish at her restaurant, and the island dish too is very she has that very similar dish to that at her restaurant in San Fran.
nice.
So,
Nice.
if you ever wanna have this kind of experience without the murder and the mayhem and the terror, go to visit Dominique's restaurant out in I think it's just called Kren out there out let's no, Atelier Kren. And she's been on Iron Chef. She's incredible. So I highly recommend checking her out. But or if she has a few different restaurants too, not just that one. So you can definitely have these experiences. And I think everybody should get to have some sort of creative, interesting, like audacious dining experience at least once in their lives. Just go and have that experience and then go have a cheeseburger after because you're
Well,
still going to be hungry.
well, because that's the thing. Like we're talking about this sort of thing.
Yeah,
As though
yeah.
you or I are going to go to any of these places. I mean,
Mhm.
speaking mostly for myself, like, and this again was a heavy theme of the movie. You
Yeah,
know, no one who deserved to be. This goes back to the Billy Joel thing you were talking about. No one who deserved to enjoy and appreciate that kind of food was in that room
right.
because they can't afford to be. I mean, the gulf between the haves and have-nots
Mhm.
is the biggest it's probably been since the Great Depression. I mean, it's ludicrous
Yeah.
that we sit here and because we would appreciate those meals, but we certainly can't afford them. And the people who can afford them generally don't appreciate them. So that's sort of how that goes.
And I agree too, and that also came to the fore a little bit when Anya at the end of the movie was like, "Your food's boring and not made with love," and all this. It was kind of pointing out to him that you're also one of the haves. Like, you think you're one of the have-nots because you're the service person, but you're also one of them too because you become such a tyrant and you become such a control freak and so absorbed in what you're doing, and he knows it too. I mean, obviously, that's part of where his own self-loathing is,
Exactly.
but it was a really great way to kind of bring that whole theme like kind of full circle is like a have not can become a have and then not see it. They can be very blinded by it. And so those positions are fluid in many ways. And a lot of times people that started without privilege come to gain privilege and then they lose sight of where they came from.
Again,
And
Rosebud. Yeah.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh God, Citizen Kane. We need to do that one, dude.
If we must. I did say I would do any movie, so yeah.
All right. I mean, if you're into it, we'll do Citizen Kane. I've seen it like 20 times, but I'm willing to watch it 21 times just to talk about it on here.
I'm due
Uh,
for a rewatch. It's been since film school, so
yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah, I think it was in a film class. That was when I first saw it too. But and then I dragged my kids to see it when they were like 9 because it was playing in the theater. I'm like, you're gonna see Citizen Kane, 9-year-olds.
I bet they love that. Holy God.
My youngest son, he was blown away by the cinematography. In fact, and he's a photographer now. I don't know. I like to think that maybe that had a formative thing on him. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah?
But we can wrap this up by saying the final course
Ah,
was rather lovely. I don't know how you land on here, but when he said that the s'more is one of the greatest affronts to the human palate, completely agree with it. I hate s'mores. I hate them. I hate them so much.
I agreed with everything he said, and I love s'mores. Because that's the point that he was making with the movie.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
okay.
it's the same thing as with the cheeseburger. This is a ghastly item to even talk about in a restaurant that's so lofty, and yet at the same time, there's something associated with it.
Mhm.
Something associated with all of these courses,
Yes.
and so he was right. It's not the taste of the s'more that we enjoy, it's the taste of childhood, and maybe there's some truth to that, I think.
I think you're right, and I think it honestly, the s'mores form factor was a little less messy. I probably like it more, but watching them come in with their sweeping
Marshmallow
alls the
vests
marshmallow vest, so everybody becomes a s'more.
and chocolate caps, chocolate
Fez
caps.
of chocolate on their fucking heads.
I was cackling my ass off and applauding after everything we've just seen, the
Yes.
absurdity of these people sitting here, and yet at the same time, the beauty of how they're arranging what I can only assume is like gunpowder graham cracker mix on the
Yeah.
floor. You have all of these elaborate, gorgeous patterns so that
Mhm.
when the first thing goes, it all goes outward like some gorgeous domino
Oh,
display. Like, I mean,
yes.
it's beautiful and it's silly and it's horrific. Certainly,
Yes.
when you see the melted chocolate coming down their faces, they're fucking burning alive.
Yeah,
Wow.
they're burning at the stake. I mean, they're quite literally because a lot of times you don't see people just burning alive. You imagine they just something blew up, and it does eventually blow up, but they burn for a good bit before that. We get to see that s'more being made,
Oh, yeah.
and all the while, our gal is heading back to the mainland in the boat that was left behind by a misbegotten encounter with a quote unquote Coast Guard
Oh, that
officer.
fake out was fucked up.
Yeah, and but she has her little goodie bag, and so, yeah, she sits there on the boat as it gets to the shore and just eats her cheeseburger, and the restaurant is blowing up as she watches it burn, and, yeah, wiping her face with that menu, and then the look of just kinda utter, like when it's the second bite that she takes that just looks like, "Oh, yeah, I'm chowing down," like, she just chows down, and then that's it,
He
and
survived.
it's so great.
Yeah.
It plays a lot like a very elaborate stage play, this does. I could almost see this movie playing really well on a stage. They ever wanted to take it on Broadway or something like that, I think it could honestly work really well. This is a very scalable story and really just such an fascinating and multi-layered thing. As I watched it the second time, I noticed so many more things, and I know when I go to watch it again, I'm gonna notice even more that I missed even the second time. So, I absolutely love this movie. It was probably my one of my favorites of last year.
Really saying something. Last year
Yeah,
was a heavy year
it
for
was
me.
a banger. Yeah, I mean, Banshees of Inisherin, which we already talked about, and one other one of my favorites from last year. So good. So, and then I mentioned Glass Onion. That was a fantastic movie last year. Last year was good, man.
Everything everywhere. That was a huge.
Oh, that was my favorite. Everything Everywhere All
I
at
mean,
Once.
mind-blowing, good
So
stuff, and even stuff like The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent was
mhm.
so fun.
And I really like the Batman. Is
Yeah,
it even cool for me to say that anymore? I don't know. I loved that movie.
some really terrific and across
Yeah,
the board stuff. I mean, people are very fond of saying, "Oh, it's all superhero movies now, and you can't get other films made." And maybe that was true for a bit, but I'm seeing a comeback in terms of smaller, more interesting movies across the board, all kinds.
agreed. I think in a combination of COVID and probably eventual that bubble was going to start to kind of, if not burst, then shrink. The
Still there. They're
superhero
still
bubble.
making
It's still
billions of
there,
dollars.
but people eventually were going to ask for more stuff. And yeah, they're demanding we need more of these sort of mid-budget movies. And even though I don't think they're still getting out people out to the theaters to see them like they should be, hopefully they can find a way to keep them going.
We have seen so many industries completely changed and upended in a very short span of time, like enough to
Yes,
make your head spin. So
right.
these things are going to need to adjust along with that. They're fighting it at first.
Mhm.
They want it to be like it always was, but it's not going to be like it always was.
No, no.
It's going to find some new context. It hasn't found it quite yet. The streaming thing has again made the movie experience practically non-existent.
Right,
They're in the theater and then they're on streaming 2 weeks later. You know why? No one wants to go to the theater anymore. I don't.
right,
I used to love
right.
it in the theater. I'll tell you something. I
Mhm.
went to an advanced screening with Cal of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Charming picture. Loved it. Very faithful to the book. But here's the thing. We're all getting in. We're taking our seats. And Cal nudges me. She said, I'm not sure about where we're sitting. I said, why aren't you sure about where we're sitting? She said, because I can count five single white males sitting by themselves in heavy jackets between
Oh.
here and the exit. So we
Oh,
have to laugh it off a little bit, but this is the fucking world where we're supposed to go to the goddamn cinema. You can't
right.
keep doing that. So
Right.
it's not
Yeah.
worth it to have an asswipe kicking my seat and talking on his phone the whole movie. But fuck it, who cares? So this whole thing is going to metamorphose. Movies aren't going to die. TV, all of these are going to find sustainable ways to go forward. They're just not sustainable right now. And so we're seeing a lot
Right.
of weird bullshit with HBO Max and weird bullshit with Netflix. But course correction is inevitable. It's going to
They
happen.
need to get it figured out and make sure the people are getting paid what they need to get paid.
Yeah.
And yes, if the movie just goes straight to streaming, I mean, I'm like you. I go to the theater now maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and it's usually for a big event movie. But yeah, just going is not enjoyable for me like it once was for many of the same reasons, just mostly because people are rude and don't know how to conduct themselves properly anymore in public. I mean, that's just but that was kind of even the case before COVID. Honestly, one of the last things I did before the lockdown at the day of the lockdown, I saw the Little Women remake that came out a few years ago. That was the last thing I did, and then I came out of the theater and I was, looking at messages on my phone and my kids telling me the schools were closing, and, yeah, it was, like, the last thing that I did for 3 years. I mean, really, for fun outside the house. So, that was an interesting thing to just kinda tie it back to movies because I hadn't been going to the movies that much, but I decided to go that day, and that day was the day the world shut down, and after that, I'm just like, "Well, I don't really see a reason to keep going back to movies for quite a while, and I didn't feel comfortable doing it. I didn't wanna do it in a mask, and so there
No.
was all that too, so but anyway, I know we're tangenting along here, and I'm gonna wrap this up. A lot of people have told me how much they love these movie episodes. They love the movie talk, so I'm
Nice.
happy to keep it up and keep it going, and, you people out there listening, there's a movie that fits sort of like the messed up, dark, morbid, screwed up themes that this show likes to represent. Let us know, and we can absolutely make that happen. And reach out to me at Gmail, dddarknesstime@gmail.com, the Facebook page. Yeah, I think that's all I got. I think we're good. So we'll go watch some more movies and we'll be back together real soon.
We are
So
taking requests. Absolutely.
yes. This episode was produced by yours truly, Allison Dixon, and wouldn't be possible without the amazing contributions of countless friends, family, and supporters. Big shouts also go out to Nathaniel Dixon for all the show art, as well as Spencer Morlock and Ken Dixon for the music. I'll be back with something new next week. In the meantime, you know what to do. Be good, you little ding dongs.